Chapter 1. The Things You Don't See. Ryan Mills had perfected the art of being forgettable. It wasn't a skill that came from an instructional manual or a training seminar. It grew instead from repetition. Hours spent in rooms where he didn't belong, conversations he wasn't part of, lives that brushed past his own without ever noticing the contact. Forgettable meant safe. Forgettable meant effective. Tonight, he looked like a man who had worn the same navy blazer on too many flights and had finally given up caring if the sleeves were wrinkled. His shirt collar sat slightly off-center. His tie loosened in a way that suggested resignation rather than rebellion. He sat alone at the hotel bar, one elbow resting casually on the dark wood, his fingers touching the condensation ring left behind by his glass. 2 stools down, the man he was watching laughed too loudly. Councilman Robert Hale had the kind of laugh that filled space like it assumed permission. The girl beside him, early 20s at best, tilted her head back in delight, her hand lingering on his arm as though it naturally belonged there. She wore a red dress that looked bought for attention rather than comfort. Ryan didn't judge her. Or him. Judgment had no place in this line of work. Only documentation. He glanced at the mirrored back wall behind the bar, not directly at Hale, but at the reflection. Hale leaned closer, his voice lowering, his hand slipping to the small of the young woman's back. Familiar behavior. Predictable. This was the 4th hotel in 14 days. For different women. Hale had a wife who hosted charity luncheons and kids whose photos appeared in campaign ads. Ryan lifted his glass and took a slow sip. He didn't internalize the work. That was another skill. Bad people existed. Flawed people more often. His job wasn't to fix them. It was to see them clearly and report what he saw. Assessment, not intervention. The bartender passed him without comment. Ryan nodded faintly, as if acknowledging an acquaintance he wouldn't recognize tomorrow. He'd nearly finished gathering what he needed when the door to the bar opened. Laughter carried in first, bright, familiar, careless. Ryan's posture barely changed, but internally, something sharpened. Sandy's voice. He recognized it immediately, even before he turned his head just enough to catch her in his peripheral vision. She walked in wearing a denim jacket over a floral dress, her hair pulled back in a messy knot that somehow always made her look effortless. She was mid-sentence, talking animatedly, her hands moving as she spoke. Ryan slid his foot back slightly, angling his body away from the entrance. It wasn't panic. It was instinct. You didn't let people recognize you when you were working. He expected David to follow her in. David didn't. Instead, Jake stepped in behind her. Jake's hand rested on her lower back. It was casual in the way that only intimate things ever were. Ryan felt the shift before his mind caught up to it. A tightening in his chest. A recalibration. His gaze flicked to the mirror, tracking them as they moved toward one of the booths along the wall. They weren't joking. They weren't talking loudly. They were close. Too close. Ryan's professional instincts surged forward, overriding the dissonance. He adjusted the angle of his phone on the bar, the movement smooth and unremarkable, as though checking a message. His recording app was already open. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. Years of investigations had taught him that context mattered, that assumptions ruined cases. The context was unfolding quickly. They slid into the booth side by side, Jake's arm draped along the back, Sandy leaning in without hesitation. Her hand disappeared under the table and reappeared resting on his thigh. Ryan's jaw set. He didn't look at them directly when they kissed. He didn't need to. The mirror reflected enough. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't exploratory. It was practiced. Comfortable. The kind of kiss that came from familiarity, not impulse. 5 minutes. He recorded 5 minutes. His mind raced through possibilities even as his body stayed calm. Does Cynthia know? Do Diane and David know? Is this some open arrangement he was never told about? The idea irritated him more than he expected. Not because of the act itself, but because omission, if intentional, was still deception. He stopped the recording, stowed the phone, finished his drink with deliberate slowness. When he stood, his shoulders sagged just enough to sell fatigue. A tired businessman heading to an early meeting. No backward glance. The night air outside was cool, sharp. Ryan inhaled deeply as he walked to his car, the parking lot lit by indifferent streetlights. The drive home blurred, headlights stretching into white lines against the dark. He trusted Cynthia. That was the anchor he held onto as his thoughts tangled themselves into knots. She was not someone who would participate in something like this, directly or indirectly, without telling him. Secrets had never been the currency of their marriage. By the time he pulled into their driveway, his decision was already made. The most honest approach was the most direct. Truth. Honesty. No conclusions. Inside, the house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Cynthia sat on the couch with her legs tucked beneath her, glasses perched on her nose, a book open but untouched. She looked up when he came in. "Hey," she said, smiling. "You're home late." Ryan set his keys down carefully. "We need to talk." Her smile softened, not alarmed, just attentive. "Okay." He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. He pulled out his phone, held it between them. I want you to watch something, he said calmly. And then I want you to tell me what you know. Cynthia's eyes flicked to the screen. Ryan, she said quietly. I don't think I'm going to like this. Neither did I, he replied. He pressed play and watched his life become unremarkable in a way he'd never trained for. Chapter 2. Disclosure. Cynthia didn't speak while the video played. Ryan watched her face more closely than the screen. He'd shown evidence to lawyers, compliance officers, and ethics boards. He'd learned long ago that people reacted less to what they saw than to what it meant to them personally. Shock registered first, eyes widening a fraction, lips parting. Then stillness, a kind of quiet calculation. When the screen went dark, the room seemed to exhale. Cynthia reached up and removed her glasses, folding them with care before setting them on the coffee table. That alone told him something. She only did that when she needed to see clearly in a way that had nothing to do with vision. How long? She asked. I don't know, Ryan said. I recorded 5 minutes. Enough to rule out coincidence. She nodded once, a mechanic motion rather than agreement. Jake and Sandy, she said as if trying the words on. Of course they are. That was not the response Ryan had anticipated. Of course, he repeated carefully. Cynthia leaned back against the couch cushions and stared at the ceiling. I didn't know. Not for sure. But something's been off for months. She glanced at him. You didn't see Diane or David around, did you? No. Yeah. Cynthia let out a humorless breath. That tracks. Ryan waited. Silence had a way of pulling truth out of people if you didn't crowd it. I noticed it first at Diane's 40th, Cynthia continued. Jake kept looking for Sandy. Not in a social way, in a checking way. Like she was his responsibility. I thought I was projecting. Ryan remembered that party. Remembered Diane beaming, the kids everywhere, the grill smoking. He'd spent most of the evening talking football with a coworker he'd recognized from a distance, content to let Cynthia orbit with Diane and Sandy. I asked Sandy, Cynthia went on, casually, no accusations. She laughed too quickly and changed the subject. I let it go. Ryan absorbed that. You didn't tell me. She didn't flinch. I didn't know anything. I had a feeling. If I told you every vague discomfort I had, we'd never sleep. That hit closer than he expected. He nodded. Fair. They sat in silence again, the quiet this time less brittle. What were you doing there? Cynthia asked gently. At the hotel. Work, Ryan said. Unrelated. Ironically, she gave a small, crooked smile. Your job really does ruin dinner parties. I know. I try not to mention it. That's a lie. He huffed, then grew serious. I want to be clear about something. I didn't go looking for this. And I didn't confront them. I left. I'm glad, Cynthia said immediately. That surprised him almost as much as her earlier response. You are. Yes, she said firmly. Because you're not their keeper. And you're not Diane's avenging angel. If you'd stepped in, it would have been about you. Not them. Ryan considered that. It aligned annoyingly well with his own instincts. Still, he said, you deserve to know. And we need to decide what we do with it. Cynthia turned fully toward him now. There is no we yet, she said. There's us, and then there's what this means to us. He studied her face, the familiar lines at the corners of her eyes, the expression he'd watched evolve over 7 years of marriage. Cynthia didn't rush. She examined things from all angles. It was one of the reasons he trusted her judgment. What does it mean to you? He asked. She paused. It means our friendships aren't what I thought they were, she said honestly. It means Diane might be hurting, or might not know yet, or might be pretending not to. It means Sandy isn't the person I thought she was. A beat. Or maybe she is, and I just didn't want to see it. Ryan felt a familiar tug, the impulse to assess, to categorize. He resisted it. This wasn't an investigation. This was his marriage. She looked at him. What does it mean to you? He chose his words carefully. It means there are more secrets in our circle than I realized. And it makes me think about transparency. What we expect from other people versus what we owe each other. Cynthia searched his expression. Is that about them? She asked quietly. Or about us? The question landed softly but solidly. Us, he admitted. Always us. She relaxed slightly. Good. They sat there, the shared weight of it settling into something manageable. I don't want this to bleed into everything, Cynthia said after a moment. We have enough on our plate. Ryan knew what she meant without her saying it. The conversations they'd circled around for months. The hypothetical child. The timelines and trade-offs and biological realities she read about late at night when she thought he was asleep. You mean the baby talk, he said. She winced good-naturedly. When you put it that way, it sounds like gossip. He smiled faintly. It's not gossip. It's planning. It's pressure, she corrected. Then, seeing his expression, softened. Not from you. From the idea of permanence. Ryan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I want to be a father, he said simply. I've never hidden that. But I meant it when I said I don't want you to do it unless you're ready. And you also meant it when you said you didn't want to wait forever, she said. Yes. She nodded slowly. I appreciate the honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Her gaze drifted back to the dark phone screen. Like tonight. Ryan hesitated, then spoke. Do you think Diane knows? Cynthia shook her head. Not yet. And when she finds out, it should be from Jake. Or Sandy. Or the truth knocking down the door on its own. Not from us. So we say nothing. For now, she said. We watch. We listen. We don't carry secrets that aren't ours. Ryan exhaled. Tension he hadn't realized he was holding easing from his shoulders. I can do that. I know you can, Cynthia said. You do it for a living. He met her eyes. That's the part that scares me. She reached for his hand. You're not invisible here. Her thumb brushed his knuckles, grounding him. They heard the refrigerator cycle on again, the mundane sound anchoring the room in normalcy. We're still having dinner with them on Saturday, Cynthia said eventually. Ryan grimaced. That sounds unpleasant. She smiled faintly. Life rarely lets us opt out cleanly. He squeezed her hand once. Whatever happens, we handle it together. I know, she said, and after a beat, added, that's why we're okay. Ryan believed her, still did, but as they turned out the lights and headed upstairs, he couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted, that lines he'd never noticed before, between honesty and harm, between seeing and remaining silent, were no longer invisible. And once you saw them, you couldn't unsee them. Chapter 3. Group Dynamics. Saturday evening arrived the way most unavoidable things did. Cheerfully, unapologetically, and right on time. Ryan stood at the kitchen counter tying his shoes for the second time while Cynthia watched him with mild amusement from the doorway. He hadn't retied them because they were loose. He'd retied them because stalling was easier than admitting anticipation edged with dread. You know, she said, folding her arms. If you tie those any tighter, you're going to lose circulation. He straightened, gave her a look. I just like symmetry. That's not true, Cynthia replied pleasantly. You like control. He considered denying it, then didn't. I like predictability. She smiled, soft but knowing. Tonight will not deliver that. No, he agreed. It will not. Dinner was at Diane and Jake's house. A standing tradition, second Saturday of the month, rotating hosts, themed cocktails that grew more elaborate with each passing year. This month's theme, according to the group text, was Mediterranean-ish. Ryan had no idea what that meant, and at this point he was too tired to ask. The drive over was quiet but not tense. Cynthia hummed along to the radio, fingers tapping lightly against her thigh. Ryan drove with his usual steady focus, eyes forward, mind cataloging exits and parking options out of habit. Diane's house glowed warmly when they arrived, light spilling from the windows into the early spring dusk. Laughter drifted out as Jake opened the door, wide smile already in place. Ryan. Cynthia, Jake said, pulling them both into quick hugs. He smelled like rosemary and something grilled. Come in, we're behind as usual. Ryan felt the dissonance immediately, the same friendly voice, the same easy manner, layered now with the knowledge he hadn't had a week ago. It didn't show on his face. He was very good at that. Inside, the house buzzed with movement. Music played softly. Diane stood by the kitchen island arranging olives with exaggerated precision. There you are, she said brightly. Please tell me you're hungry. Jake keeps snacking off the platter. Lies, Jake called back. Quality control. Sandy and David were already there. Ryan clocked it instantly. Sandy laughed too loudly when she saw Cynthia, crossing the room to hug her with familiar enthusiasm. David followed a moment later, his smile a touch more restrained. You look great, Sandy said, holding Cynthia at arm's length. That color is perfect on you. Thank you, Cynthia said evenly. You too. Ryan shook David's hand. Their grip met firmly, briefly. David's eyes flicked to Sandy, then back. Nothing overt, nothing undeniable. And yet, they settled into the living room with drinks, something citrusy and strong. Conversation flowed easily at first. Work complaints, traffic, trivia night plans, the comfortable rhythm of people who'd known each other long enough to skip the preamble. Ryan listened more than he spoke. He always had, but tonight it was intentional. He watched how Jake positioned himself near Sandy when they stood, how Diane's gaze occasionally lingered on them, puzzled but unguarded, how Cynthia stayed close to Ryan, not clinging but aligned. At one point, Sandy launched into a story about a disastrous yoga class. And I swear, she said, gesturing wildly, this instructor was 19 if she was a day, telling us to connect with our inner wisdom. My inner wisdom wanted a chair. Laughter rippled around the group. Jake laughed a beat too late. Ryan caught the exchange of looks between Sandy and Jake. Quick, charged, gone. The kind of look that required no explanation to the people sharing it, and passed unnoticed by everyone else, except Ryan. He took a sip of his drink to give himself a moment. This was what Cynthia had meant. Watching, listening, not carrying secrets that weren't theirs. Dinner was served on mismatched platters. Food passed hand to hand. The table was crowded, knees brushing, elbows touching. Ryan found himself seated across from Diane, with Cynthia at his side. "So," Diane said, slicing into something that smelled incredible. "Any news from you two?" Cynthia stilled for half a second. Ryan felt it beside him like a shift in air pressure. "No news," Cynthia said pleasantly. "Just surviving another week." Diane smiled knowingly. "You've been married long enough that news can mean anything." Jake cleared his throat. "Diane's angling for grandkids." "I am not," Diane objected automatically. "I'm just curious." Sandy leaned back in her chair. "Kids change everything," she said, tone light but eyes sharp. "Sometimes not in the ways you expect." Ryan's gaze flicked to Cynthia before he could stop himself. She didn't look back. "That's true," Cynthia said after a beat. "But so does staying exactly the same." An odd quiet settled over the table. Not uncomfortable, just noticeable, like a skipped beat in a song. David broke it by raising his glass. "To food that's way better than expected." They drank, the moment dissolving. Later, as plates were cleared and dessert appeared, something involving honey and nuts that stuck pleasantly to Ryan's teeth. Conversation splintered into smaller pockets. Ryan found himself at the edge of the kitchen with David, both of them ostensibly helping with dishes. "You seem distracted," David said casually, running water over a plate. "Long week," Ryan replied. "True enough." David nodded. "Work's been demanding." Ryan studied him. "You don't say." David's laugh was tight. "You know how it is." Ryan did. But he also knew when someone was choosing ambiguity over honesty. Across the room, Cynthia and Diane talked quietly, heads close together. Sandy hovered nearby, pretending not to listen while listening very carefully. Ryan dried his hands, watching the room like a chessboard mid-game. No one had made a move yet. Everyone was pretending the pieces were still where they'd always been. When it was time to leave, hugs were exchanged again at the door. Sandy squeezed Cynthia a little too hard. "Let's do brunch soon," Sandy said. "Just us." Cynthia smiled. "Sure." Outside, the night felt cooler, cleaner. Ryan took a long breath as they walked to the car. "That was," he said slowly, "educational." Cynthia let out a quiet laugh. "You're very diplomatic." "I didn't break anything." "No," she said. "You didn't." They drove home in companionable silence. Not heavy, just full. At a red light, Cynthia reached over and rested her hand on his arm. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For trusting me to handle things my way." Ryan turned his hand to take hers. "You didn't give me a reason not to." As the light turned green and they pulled forward, Ryan realized something else, uncomfortable and undeniable. Invisibility worked when you chose it. But when you cared about the outcome, staying unseen was its own kind of risk. Chapter 4. Lines crossed. The brunch invitation arrived Sunday morning, slipped into Cynthia's phone like nothing had changed. "Sandy, still up for just us brunch? I need some girl time." Cynthia read it twice before setting her phone face down on the counter. Ryan watched from the kitchen table, coffee cooling between his hands. "Well?" he asked. "She wants to meet," Cynthia said. "Just us." Ryan nodded slowly. "That didn't take long." "No," Cynthia agreed. She opened a cabinet, then closed it without taking anything out. It was always coming. Ryan waited. He'd learned over the years that Cynthia thought better when she spoke through the options out loud. "I can go," she continued, "and pretend I don't know what I've seen. Or I can go and ask her directly. Or I can not go at all, which will also say something." "And none of those are neutral," Ryan said. She shot him a wry look. "You married me. You knew I don't do neutral." Ryan smiled faintly, then sobered. "You don't owe her confrontation." "I know," Cynthia said. "But I owe myself clarity." That, more than anything, told him she would go. They didn't have the luxury of dissecting it further. Ryan's work phone buzzed, sharp and insistent. He glanced at the notification and swore under his breath. "Trouble?" Cynthia asked. "Complication," he said. "Same politician." The security committee moved up their timeline. "They want the report sooner." She grimaced sympathetically. "Of course they do." "I have to be careful," Ryan continued. "The video I took of Jake and Sandy is not yours to use," Cynthia finished immediately. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Exactly. But it exists," she added. "And that's the problem, isn't it?" Ryan stared into his coffee. "In my world, evidence is something you control carefully. You decide when it's relevant, when it's admissible. Whether it ruins a life is secondary." "That doesn't work here," Cynthia said quietly. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." The line between professional and personal, so clean, so enforced for years, had blurred. Worse, it had crossed. Later that afternoon, Ryan found himself sitting in his home office, the footage backed up on an encrypted drive alongside his other cases. He stared at the folder longer than necessary. He could ignore it. He would ignore it. But he couldn't pretend it hadn't changed the way he looked at people. Brunch was at a small cafe with too many plants and too few tables. The kind of place that prided itself on reclaimed wood and artisanal jams. Cynthia arrived first, choosing a seat near the window. She didn't touch the menu. Sandy arrived 10 minutes late, flushed and breathless. Sorry, she said, sliding into the chair across from Cynthia. Parking was a nightmare. No worries, Cynthia replied evenly. They ordered. Small talk filled the space between them like packing material necessary, ultimately disposable. So, Sandy said finally, stirring sugar into her coffee that didn't need it. You okay? Cynthia tilted her head. Why wouldn't I be? Sandy's smile faltered just slightly. I don't know. You were quiet Saturday. Cynthia held her gaze. I was observant. Silence stretched. Sandy exhaled and leaned back, as if bracing. Okay, she said. That feels pointed. It is, Cynthia replied. She kept her voice calm, firm. Sandy, what's going on with you and Jake? For a moment, Sandy looked genuinely startled. Then her shoulders dropped. You saw, she said. Cynthia didn't flinch. Yes. Sandy scrubbed a hand over her face. God, I told him this would happen. You told him not to do it, Cynthia corrected. Sandy laughed, short and humorless. I told him not to do it where people could see. The words landed like a slap. Cynthia sat back, the realization sharp and cold. So this isn't new. No, Sandy admitted. It isn't. Cynthia closed her eyes briefly, letting the weight of it settle. When she opened them again, her voice was steady. Does Diane know? Sandy shook her head immediately. No. And I'm not the villain you think I am. I haven't said you were. But you're thinking it, Sandy said defensively. You always do this. You analyze. You judge quietly. Cynthia met her anger without matching it. I'm judging your actions, she said. Not your existence. That feels like semantics. Sometimes semantics are all that keep us honest. Sandy's eyes shone. Not quite tears, but close. My marriage has been dead for years, she said. David and I are roommates with shared bills. Jake listens to me, sees me. And Diane? Cynthia asked softly. Does she deserve truth? Or just convenience? Sandy flinched. You don't understand. Try me, Cynthia said. But Sandy shook her head. I can't. Not without burning everything down. Cynthia stood, placing money on the table. Then understand this, she said. I won't lie for you. I won't expose you. But I won't pretend. Sandy looked up at her, stricken. You're pulling away. I'm drawing a boundary, Cynthia corrected. There's a difference. As she walked out, Cynthia felt a mix of grief and relief. Some friendships ended with explosions. Others just faded when the truth made too much noise. Ryan was in the garage when she got home, methodically reorganizing tools that didn't need it. He looked up the moment he heard the door. How was it? He asked. She admitted it, Cynthia said. All of it. Ryan straightened slowly. And I told her I wouldn't protect lies that weren't mine. He nodded, respect clear in his expression. You okay? Cynthia considered. I will be. They stood there together, the quiet thick but not uncomfortable. Later that night, Ryan's phone rang again. An unfamiliar number. Ryan Mills, he answered. Mr. Mills, a voice said briskly. This is Evan Porter from the Oversight Committee. We have a question about an unrelated matter, something involving a local business owner. Jake Harmon. Ryan's pulse spiked. He kept his voice neutral. What about him? We received an anonymous tip suggesting questionable conduct. We're wondering if you've encountered anything relevant in your work. There it was. The line, bright and unmistakable. I have not, Ryan said clearly. Understood, Porter replied. Thank you for your time. The call ended. Ryan sat very still. When Cynthia joined him on the couch, he told her everything. You did the right thing, she said without hesitation. I know, he replied. But it cost something. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Doing right things usually does. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. For the first time since the hotel bar, Ryan felt certain of something. Invisibility was a luxury he no longer wanted in his own life. And whatever came next, children, fractures, new beginnings, he intended to face it seen. Chapter 5. Private Conversations. The group text finally went quiet on Tuesday. No memes. No sarcastic commentary about leftover desserts. No last-minute plans that pretended nothing had shifted beneath their feet. Cynthia noticed it first. She noticed most things first. They're circling, she said that evening, setting her phone down on the kitchen counter. Everyone's waiting for someone else to flinch. Ryan was chopping vegetables with unnecessary precision. Stalemates do that. She watched him for a moment. You've thought about this before. I make a living watching structures collapse, he said. People rarely want to be the first crack. As if summoned by the observation, the doorbell rang. They froze simultaneously, then exchanged a look that bordered on amused disbelief. Well, Cynthia said. That didn't take long. Ryan wiped his hands and opened the door. Diane stood on the porch, coat still on, hair pulled back too tightly. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Hi, she said. Can I come in? Cynthia was already there, stepping forward. Of course. Diane didn't waste time with pleasantries. She sat on the edge of the couch instead of settling into it, hands clenched in her lap. I need you to tell me the truth, she said quickly. And I need you to do it right now before I talk myself out of asking. Cynthia sat beside her, close but not crowding. Ryan stayed standing, leaning casually against the wall, present without looming. Diane's eyes flicked to him. This isn't about work, she said sharply. I don't want professional analysis. Ryan held up a hand. You're getting the husband version. Quiet. Honest. Diane swallowed. Are Jake and Sandy having an affair? The word hovered between them, heavy and undeniable. Yes, Cynthia said. Diane nodded once, sharply. Okay. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. I knew, she said softly. I didn't know how, but I knew something was wrong. He stopped arguing with me. Do you know how terrifying that is after 20 years? Cynthia reached for her hand. Diane gripped it immediately, knuckles whitening. I kept thinking I was imagining it, Diane continued, or that it was me, that I'd finally worn out my welcome in my own marriage. Ryan shifted, uncomfortable in a way he rarely was. There was no report format for this. No conclusions section. Do you want me to talk to him? Cynthia asked gently. Diane shook her head. No, not yet. I want to see how long he keeps lying when I give him rope. Ryan grimaced faintly. That's effective. Diane huffed a broken laugh. I learned from the best. I married him. She straightened, eyes clearer now. I'm not asking you to choose sides. I just needed to know if I was crazy. You're not, Cynthia said immediately. Diane stood abruptly, swiping at her eyes now. I should go before I do something dramatic, like throw out all his shoes. That's later, Cynthia said. When it's earned. Diane laughed despite herself, hugging Cynthia tightly before turning to Ryan and giving him a brief, fierce squeeze. Thank you, she said, for not protecting him. Ryan met her gaze. He's responsible for his own choices. When the door closed behind her, the house felt strangely hollow. Cynthia leaned back against the couch and stared at the ceiling. That went better than I expected. Ryan sat beside her. Low bar. She smiled tiredly. 2 nights later, another doorbell. This time it was David. He looked like he'd aged a year in 3 days. Eyes shadowed, jaw set tight. I think you know why I'm here, he said. Ryan stepped aside. Come in. David didn't take off his coat. He stood near the door like he might bolt. She told me, he said bluntly. Sandy. He glanced at Cynthia. She said you know. We do, Cynthia replied calmly. David ran a hand through his hair. I don't even know what I'm supposed to feel, he admitted. Angry, relieved, humiliated. He laughed bitterly. Apparently I've been the world's most emotionally available placeholder. Ryan spoke carefully. What do you want to do? David stared at him. That's the thing, isn't it? You guys always seem to know what you want. Cynthia and Ryan exchanged a look. That's a misconception, Cynthia said. We just talk about the confusion instead of pretending it's not there. David slumped onto a chair. I don't think Sandy wants to end things, he said quietly. With Jake. Ryan's jaw tightened. He didn't comment. I think she wants me to accommodate them, David continued. Pretend I'm progressive enough to accept it without being told. That's not progress, Cynthia said. That's erasure. David nodded, eyes glistening. I think I needed to hear that. He stood, clearly depleted. I don't know what happens next, but thank you for letting me say it out loud. After he left, Ryan locked the door more firmly than necessary. Yes, Cynthia said softly. Everything's imploding. And somehow, Ryan replied, we're still standing in the same spot. She looked at him. That doesn't mean we're untouched. No, he agreed. It means we're conscious. Later that night, they lay in bed, the room dark and quiet. You've been awfully thoughtful, Cynthia murmured. Ryan stared at the ceiling. Watching people unravel makes you inventory your own seams. Pause. Then, are we okay? She turned toward him. Is that a professional question or a personal one? Personal. She rested her hand on his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat. We're not avoiding each other. We're not lying to ourselves. And we still want the same big things, even if we're nervous about them. He swallowed. That doesn't mean we're immune. No, she said. It means we're intentional. Ryan exhaled slowly. I don't want our life to happen by default. Cynthia smiled faintly in the dark. Neither do I. Silence settled, not the heavy kind, but the breathable kind. About the baby, she said eventually. He didn't interrupt. I think I've been afraid that choosing it would mean losing us, she continued. But watching everyone else try to live without choosing anything at all? She shook her head. That scares me more. Ryan turned toward her. I'm not asking for certainty. I'm asking for honesty. She kissed him, soft, grounding. Then let's keep talking, she said. Before life decides for us. Ryan pulled her close, heart steady, mind clear in a way it hadn't been in weeks. Outside their house, Relationships cracked and shifted. Truths forced their way into the open. Inside, two people held on to something simpler and harder. They chose each other. Again. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. The reckoning did not arrive with shouting or smashed plates. It arrived Tuesday night with lasagna. Ryan knew something was wrong the moment he opened the oven and realized Jake had rearranged the kitchen without asking. Not dramatically, just enough to signal ownership. The cutting board moved. The knife block shifted 6 inches to the left. Cynthia caught his eye across the counter, her expression unreadable but alert. "Everyone's early," she murmured. "That's never a good sign," Ryan replied. They had agreed to host this dinner together before everything cracked. Canceling now would have turned silence into accusation. Sometimes, forward momentum meant walking straight into discomfort and trusting your balance. The doorbell rang again, then again. By the time everyone had arrived, Diane rigid and composed, Jake overly cheerful, Sandy too bright, David quiet as a shadow. The house felt smaller than it ever had. 6 people, 1 truth, and a collective determination to see who would blink first. Cynthia poured wine. Ryan carried plates. The choreography was familiar, soothing in its repetition. They sat. Conversation stumbled through small talk like a car trying to start on a cold morning. "So," Jake said finally, clapping his hands together a little too loudly, "lasagna smells amazing." Cynthia smiled thinly. Ryan followed the recipe this time. Ryan shot her a look. It was 1 deviation. "It was 3, she corrected. Sandy laughed. Diane did not. David stared at his plate. The silence that followed was no longer polite, pressed inward. "I can't do this," Diane said suddenly. All eyes turned to her. "I can't sit here pretending we're all fine just because we're used to the furniture arrangement," she continued, voice calm but shaking at the edges. "So I'm going to ask the question out loud instead of letting it rot in my head." Jake stiffened. Diane looked directly at him. "Are you sleeping with Sandy?" Ryan felt Cynthia's hand slide into his under the table, steadying, not pleading. Jake opened his mouth, closed it. Sandy inhaled sharply. "Diane?" "No." Diane cut in, her gaze never leaving her husband. "Don't." The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Ryan found himself counting the seconds without trying. "Yes," Jake said finally. "I am." The word fell heavy but clean. David stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "That's all I needed to hear," he said tightly, heading for the door. "David," Sandy said, rising halfway. He stopped but didn't turn around. "I loved you," he said quietly. Then he left. The front door closed with a decisive click. No one moved. Diane laughed then. One short, incredulous sound. "Wow," she said. Straight to the point once there's nowhere left to hide. Jake reached for her. She pulled back. "Save it," she said. She turned to Cynthia. "How long have you known?" Cynthia met her eyes. "Since last week." Diane nodded. "Thank you for being honest." Then, unexpectedly, she turned to Ryan. "You too." He blinked. You didn't lie," she said. "That counts." Sandy crumpled into her chair, face in her hands. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered. "When was it supposed to happen?" Cynthia asked, not unkindly. Silence answered. Jake scrubbed his face. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Diane stood, pushing her chair back with calm finality. "Meaning isn't the same as consideration," she said. "I'm leaving." "I'll go with you," Cynthia said immediately. "No," Diane said gently. "I need to do this alone." She grabbed her coat and left without further ceremony. The house felt cavernous now. Jake sat heavily, staring at the table. Sandy looked lost. Ryan felt a familiar instinct rise, the urge to categorize damage, identify next steps, restore order. He didn't act on it. Instead, he stood. "I think this dinner is over," he said evenly. "There's leftovers. Take some if you want. Or don't." Jake nodded numbly. Sandy gathered her things without looking at anyone. They left separately. The house went quiet in a way that felt earned. Cynthia released a long breath and leaned back against the counter. "Well," Ryan let out a dry laugh. "That escalated exactly as predicted." She looked at him. "You okay?" He considered the question seriously. "I didn't intervene. I didn't hide. I didn't fix anything that wasn't mine." He paused. "I think that's progress." She smiled faintly. "You're learning." He raised an eyebrow. Bold claim. They cleaned up in companionable silence, the domestic normalcy grounding after emotional freefall. Later, sitting on the couch with the lights dimmed, Cynthia leaned against him. "I'm proud of us," she said. "For hosting a disaster? For not becoming one." Ryan wrapped an arm around her. "There's fallout coming." "I know. Phone calls, divisions, awkward group texts." She laughed softly. "We'll survive." He hesitated, then spoke. "Watching that, it scared me." Cynthia nodded. "Me too. Not because of infidelity," he continued. "Because of drift. They stopped choosing each other before they stopped loving each other." She turned to face him. "Are you afraid we will?" "No," he said honestly. I'm afraid we won't notice if we do. She kissed him gently. Then we keep noticing. Outside, sirens passed in the distance. Life continued, indifferent but present. Ryan held her a little tighter. Invisibility had served him once. Awareness served him now. And this choosing to stay, to speak, to be seen. This was the hardest job he'd ever taken. One he intended to keep. Chapter 7. What We Choose. Fall arrived quietly, without drama. Ryan noticed it in the mornings first. The cooler air when he stepped outside with his coffee. The way the light shifted just enough that the house felt different at 7 a.m. Cynthia noticed it in the evenings, when the windows fogged slightly and she instinctively reached for a sweater instead of arguing with the thermostat. The world kept moving. Their small corner of it had changed anyway. The group text was gone now, archived without comment. Diane had moved into a short-term rental across town. Jake was staying with his brother. Sandy and David were working things out, which meant different things depending on who you asked and when. There were still ripples, mutual friends checking in carefully, invitations that arrived hedged with caveats. But the implosion had finished its loudest work. What remained was quieter, more intimate. Ryan sat on the porch one Saturday afternoon, sanding down an old chair that had never quite fit anywhere else. He didn't need to restore it. He could have replaced it easily. He sanded because the repetition calmed him, because it gave his hands something to do while his mind worked through problems with no clear solutions. Cynthia came out with 2 glasses of iced tea and handed him one before settling into the porch swing. You look thoughtful, she said. He smiled faintly. Occupational hazard. She leaned back, watching the leaves stir in the yard. Do you regret anything? Ryan paused, considering with the same care he brought to a difficult interview. No, he said finally. I regret some outcomes, not the choices. She nodded, accepting that distinction. Good. They sat for a while in easy silence, the kind that came from comfort rather than avoidance. It was Cynthia who broke it, her voice casual but her words anything but. I stopped taking my birth control last month. Ryan's hand stilled on the arm of the chair. He didn't look at her right away. He didn't want surprise to masquerade as reaction. When were you going to tell me? He asked gently. Now, she said. I wanted to be sure it wasn't an impulsive reaction to everything else unraveling. I wanted it to be a decision, not a rebellion. He set the sandpaper down and turned fully toward her. And I'm scared, Cynthia said without preamble. Not of you, not of us. I'm scared of becoming invisible to myself. Ryan absorbed that. Because of what you saw happen to them. Yes, she admitted. They stopped being intentional. They let life default them into something they didn't examine until it hurt. He considered the porch, the yard, the quiet life they'd built piece by piece. We examine things. Maybe too much. She smiled. That's what I'm counting on. He reached for her hand, the familiar gesture grounding. I'm scared too. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Of what? That I'll be good at being a father, he said honestly. But bad at being present if I don't watch myself. That I'll solve problems instead of listening. That I'll treat our kid like a mission instead of a person. Cynthia laughed softly. You already know that about yourself. That's half the battle. Investigators aren't known for surrender, he said. She squeezed his hand. But husbands can learn. The chair sat unfinished on the porch. Forgotten. Weeks passed. Life filled the space where crisis had been. Cynthia had brunch with Diane. No pretense, no absolution. Just 2 women acknowledging grief and choosing kindness where they could manage it. Ryan ran into Jake once at the grocery store. They exchanged polite nods and nothing more. It was enough. Then, one Tuesday evening, Cynthia stood in the bathroom staring at a thin plastic stick like it was judging her. Ryan found her there, barefoot in the doorway. Well? He asked quietly. She turned, eyes shining with something between terror and wonder. It's early, she said. But it's positive. He didn't rush her, didn't lift her off the floor or declare miracles. Instead, he stepped closer and rested his forehead against hers. How do you feel? Like my life just changed and also like nothing has happened yet, she said. Like I'm standing on the edge of something huge. He smiled, a warmth spreading through him that surprised his carefully guarded heart. That's how most important things start. They told no one for a while. Not out of superstition, out of respect. The knowledge was still fragile, still forming. Cynthia read obsessively, then stopped and handed the books to Ryan so he could read too. This is not a solo project, she said firmly. He took that seriously. One night, lying together in bed, listening to rain tap softly at the windows, Cynthia turned to him. If at any point you feel like I'm pulling away, she said, or you are, promise me we'll say it out loud. I promise, he said immediately, then added, same goes for resentment. She winced theatrically. You had to use the scary word. It's a useful word, he replied. It keeps marriages honest. She smiled, then grew serious. We were patient, she said, but we didn't wait. There's a difference. Ryan kissed her forehead. I've had enough of waiting rooms. Months later, autumn deepened toward winter. Cynthia's body changed slowly, deliberately. like it was deciding who it wanted to become next. Ryan accompanied her to appointments, sat silently through the ultrasounds with his hand locked around hers, felt something ancient and fierce take root in him. One evening, as they drove home under a sky painted with the first hints of snow, Cynthia sighed contentedly. "I used to be afraid that having a child would make us smaller," she said. Ryan glanced at her. And now I think it's going to make us braver." He smiled, eyes on the road, on the life unfolding lane by lane ahead of them. For the first time in his life, Ryan Mills wasn't trying to be invisible. He was choosing to be seen every day by the people who mattered most. And that, he knew now, was the most deliberate decision he would ever make. Chapter 8. Scene: Ryan Mills discovered two things on the same morning. The first was that invisibility, once abandoned, did not return on command. The second was that his life was about to get very loud. It started with laughter. Not the polite kind or the restrained, careful sort cultivated over years of professional neutrality, but the unexpected, helpless kind that came out of Cynthia while she stood in the kitchen, one hand on her lower back, the other braced against the counter. "I swear," she said between breaths, "if this kid grows up and hears the story, they're never going to respect me." Ryan leaned against the fridge, watching her with a softness that surprised him even now. "You slipped on a blueberry, Cynthia. In your own kitchen." "It was one blueberry," she protested, "and it attacked first." He crossed the room in 2 steps and steadied her, hands firm and familiar at her waist. "No permanent damage?" She smiled up at him. "Just my dignity." "Long gone," he said affectionately. "I married you anyway." They moved carefully now, together, small calibrations without commentary. He noticed everything. She noticed that he noticed and let it happen. There was something profoundly intimate about being witnessed at this stage. Fear, clumsiness, wonder, and all. The pregnancy had progressed gently, almost politely. Cynthia felt good most days, tired some afternoons, emotional in ways that surprised and amused her in equal measure. Ryan attended every appointment he reasonably could, sat quietly through explanations and charts and future hypotheticals, and asked thoughtful questions that occasionally made the doctor pause and smile. "You're very attentive," she'd said once. Ryan had nodded, unsurprised. "I'm invested." The nursery was still unfinished, a deliberate choice. They resisted the urge to rush, to fill every uncertainty with objects. There was time. They were learning to trust that. Their circle looked different now. Diane and Cynthia met for coffee once a week, no longer orbiting around anyone else's comfort. There was grief there, yes, but also a fiercer honesty than before. Diane was rediscovering herself with a mixture of enthusiasm and awe, like someone who'd stepped off a moving walkway and realized the ground could still carry her. David had moved out. Sandy had moved inward in ways Cynthia didn't pretend to understand anymore. They were polite when they crossed paths. That was enough. Ryan found he didn't miss the group dynamic the way he thought he might. Friendship that required silence, he'd learned, cost more than it gave. One Saturday afternoon, Cynthia came home from brunch with Diane, wearing an expression Ryan recognized instantly. "Something happened," he said, setting aside the book he'd been pretending to read. She dropped her bag and sat beside him. "Diane asked if you'd help her." His brow furrowed. "With what?" "She's considering going back to school. Law. She wants to know if you'd look over her application essay." Ryan blinked. "Me?" "She said you're good at seeing things clearly without trying to own them." Cynthia smiled at him. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said about you." Ryan felt something settle in his chest. Unexpected. Solid. "I'd be happy to." That night, lying in bed with the windows open and June air drifting in, Ryan turned to Cynthia. "I think I've been practicing invisibility for so long that I forgot how to be useful when people look at me directly," he said quietly. She traced idle patterns on his arm. "You're not invisible," she said. "You're just intentional about where you show up." He smiled. "That's a generous reframe." She hummed. "I'm hormonal. It makes me poetic." Weeks later, standing in a softly lit room with a flickering screen between them, Ryan felt something happen to him that no amount of training had prepared him for. The heartbeat filled the space, fast, bright, indisputable. Cynthia squeezed his hand hard, eyes shining. "That's real," she whispered. Ryan nodded, throat tight. "Very real." In that moment, the part of him that analyzed, tracked, predicted fell completely silent. There was no report to file, no discretion to exercise. This was not something to remain unseen. This was something to show up for, fully. Later, they celebrated quietly. Takeout eaten on the couch. Glasses of sparkling water clinked together with mock solemnity. "To visible choices," Cynthia said. "To being brave instead of comfortable," Ryan replied. They told people slowly after that. Diane cried. Ryan's mother nearly dropped the phone. Even Sandy sent a careful, sincere message that Cynthia read, considered, and accepted without reopening any doors. Their life filled with small joys, baby clothes that made no logical sense, names debated and discarded, evenings spent talking about who they wanted to be when the house grew louder and sleep grew scarce. One evening, as they walked through the neighborhood at sunset, Cynthia slowed, pressing a hand to her belly. What is it? Ryan asked immediately, alert without panic. She smiled. Nothing dramatic, just movement. He crouched instinctively, resting his head where she gestured. Hey there, he murmured, ridiculous and sincere. Cynthia laughed softly. You can't investigate your way into parenthood. No, he agreed. I can show up. She drew him back to standing and kissed him, unselfconscious and sure. For years, Ryan Mills had learned to disappear at will, to be forgettable, unobtrusive, unseen. Now, as the sun dipped low and their shadows stretched long ahead of them, he understood the truth he'd been circling all along. Visibility was not vulnerability when it was chosen with care. Love was not safety, it was presence, and choosing it every day was the bravest thing he would ever do. Hand in hand, they walked forward. Scene.